Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen. On this episode, we've got David Rogers. He's a professor at Columbia University. He's the world's leading expert on digital transformation. He's written multiple books. He's a keynote speaker and a pretty inspirational guy. David, thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Jess. Really, really excited to be on the podcast with you.
So you've worked with so many great companies, HSBC, Procter & Gamble, GE, Toyota, Cartier. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I'm interested with all that experience in these previous books. I'd love to know the subject of the new one that, probably by the time this airs will be out.
Yeah. So this new book is called The Digital Transformation Roadmap. And this is a topic, kind of a terrain I've been looking at for, over a decade since I started writing and researching the work into my prior book, my fourth book, which was in 2016, The Digital Transformation Playbook. And I was actually, as it turned out, the first book written on the topic of digital transformation. Kind of the phrase was just sort of emerging and being bandied about. And it seemed to sort of capture what I was looking at, which was how do these organizations that are kind of already there in the world, often have a lot of history before the digital era, suddenly find all this change coming at them incredibly rapidly? And how do they respond? How should they respond? What's the difference between those who are managing to sort of catch their footing and really do things that are creating value in the market, moving ahead, adapting, and those who are sort of kept feeling like the tide was going out and leaving them washed up like a beached whale on the shore? So I started looking at that. And what I first found was that there was a real problem of what I would call strategy, really. People and organizations falling into these traps of what I would call strategic blind spots. So not even really recognizing that kind of rules and operating assumptions that were behind the way you thought about what business you were in, who your customers were, who your competition is. How do you define, what are the growth opportunities for your business, and how you define your business itself? And I found there were a lot of things we'd been teaching for decades in business schools that were, things like how do you define competition? And all the classic theories and models were based around industry as the sort of, very clear fixed unit. Well, what industry are you in? And then you can apply, Michael Porter's 5 forces and lots of other sorts of things. And that's simply not a very useful starting point at this point if you want to think about competition, I would argue, in the digital era. And there's a lot of sort of evidence around that, from the dynamics of platform business models to co-opetition and companies that kind of skip over barriers of industries, every day, like an Amazon. So that was kind of my early work looking at this question, how do these companies adapt? And what I learned was in really digging into that and sort of laying out a set of sort of strategy principles about how do we have to rethink our businesses, was that is hard, but it's not the hardest part. And these established businesses, even if they're able to do the work to sort of really reimagine, rethink about the relationship to customers, customer networks, think about different kinds of digital business models, think about continuously adapting their value proposition, do all these things and see where they might go and how they might grow. Established businesses find it very hard to then make that change happen. And particularly as organizations get more complex, sort of larger, more headcount, more lines of business, more geographies of operation. And I just saw case after case where companies really got it. They saw that, the world is changing and digital technologies are transforming or disrupting or changing market needs, customer expectations, new possibilities for our business, bringing in new competitors. They kind of got why and how they needed to change, and yet they found it really hard to do so. So that really drove me in my research for the last 7 years, and my work with all these companies is to try to figure out why. And why is it so hard? What are those kind of barriers to established businesses making this kind of change happen at scale? And what can we do right? I mean, the good news is that there are businesses that are big, complex, many of them old, that are actually making real meaningful change happen at scale, and it's really delivering on business fundamentals. So if we can look at those kind of through lines, the kind of red thread between very different examples and very different industries, and see what they have in common, we can start to put together this, as I call it, a roadmap for how do we sort of get past these barriers to change and make real change happen on an ongoing basis in these businesses.
Yeah. So it's interesting going through some of your previous presentations and things, seeing numbers that we talked about a little bit before the show, where you're talking about 70% of digital transformations don't reach expectations. And it
Yeah,
makes me think about other corporate change initiatives. Like those numbers are almost the exact same for like lean continuous improvement programs.
yeah,
And then when
yeah,
you started listing off reasons that it didn't happen, it's like the same as like our leadership training business. We've done a bunch in lean, and it's like
yeah,
there's so much overlap.
yeah.
Do you want to kind of maybe give us an overview on those, and maybe we can dive into them individually a little bit
Sure. Yeah.
later?
So the barriers that I found, and I agree, these are really sort of fundamental. They're intrinsic to the nature of, established, complex, larger organizations. Because really, I wanted to see. You hear 100 reasons why companies are struggling. Right? They blame the legal department that's like shutting things down, or compliance is the problem if you're in a regulated industry, or it's it's investors won't support certain things, and spending the money on that it takes. There's all sorts of things people will point to, but what I found in my research was there's really sort of 5 fundamental barriers that are behind almost all the problems I see in these companies. So the first, and it's usually some combination, may not be all of these equally, but the first barrier, I see a lot of established companies who are trying to drive change, right? We've got to adapt to the digital era. We've got to transform. We've got to innovate. But they do not have a shared vision that has been clearly defined, right? So something that is specific to that company, right? I see a lot of companies, they say, oh, it's very generic. They say, oh, we want to become a digital first company. We are going to future-proof ourselves for the digital era, which is absurd. Just these kind of vague general ideas that you could say about any company. And instead, what I see the companies who are making change happen, they start with a real clear understanding of what's going on here. Why does this matter to our particular business? Are we a mid-sized professional services business in Southeast Asia? Are we a luxury goods company historically based in Western Europe, and our market is primarily China now? Are we a Latin American BPO firm? Are we an American regional insurance company? In that context, your customers, your market, your industry dynamics, your products and services, what's going on? Why do you have to change? What is the position you see that you're going to hold in the future, that sort of future-facing, strategic position you want to hold? And what is your unique, right to win? Why you? So all of that is typically not very clear. And when none of that is clear, it becomes a huge impediment to change. That's the first barrier. Maybe I'll do the others a little
Can I
more quickly, or jump
I,
in. Yeah, jump in.
yeah.
I'm sure you've
So,
seen this.
well, and so I've heard your Walmart example about relying on, most Americans are within 10 miles of Walmart. So like, here's an advantage that directly related to our market. We've got an advantage we've got a specific, right? What's another success
Right.
story of a company that did make something that wasn't generic, that is right,
Yeah.
for their customers?
So that's one of the key things is identifying your unique advantages, right? Really, that's sort of key to the right to win. It's what are your unique advantages and what are your strategic limits, right? For any organization, there's certain things you're not willing to do, and it's very important to be clear about that up front for whatever reasons. So another example, MasterCard is very clear about thinking about what are their unique assets and position. And they have a few specific things. One is they have a incredible amount of transaction level commercial data that is, pretty nearly unparalleled. So that gives them a very interesting advantage for certain kinds of strategic opportunities. They also have, because they had historically a multi-sided business model, a platform, if you will. And guess what? Platforms predated the digital era and the internet. They're just much easier to build and scale now, which is why we see them so much more. But MasterCard was built on, connecting issuers of credit, merchants, and purchasers, cardholders. So 3 different networks. They have massive networks. So they are already plugged in and connected to all the biggest financial institutions in the world, this incredible range of merchants, and a whole consumer, side as well. So they are always looking at, okay, what is they aim to be, not just a credit card network, but look beyond the core and say we want to be a fintech business. But they're looking at what are the fintech opportunities, what are the strategies that could be pursued or the problems that could be solved where our unique assets are particularly germane and should give us a leg up. So that's another example of a company that's done this well. I think Disney has done this well. They're really sort of articulating. I mean, one of the things Bob Iger has done well is to really sort of talk about what makes us unique as a company in terms of intellectual property and stories and so forth, but also really having a clear vision of, they are repositioning themselves as a direct consumer business, which is very different than what they've been historically. And having that spelled out so that people inside the business understand that where you're headed and why you're headed that direction is an incredibly important sort of first piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Uh, I like both those examples. Let's go for principle number two.
Yeah. So the second sort of barrier, which each one has then a step to sort of address it, is companies very often lack clear growth priorities. And maybe this is particular to digital transformation as opposed to transformation in general, I think. There's this myth, this mistaken belief that digital transformation is all about technology. That the heart of it and the key to it is getting the right technology or changing your technology. It's like something you're going to get the right vendor and install some software and change your IT infrastructure. Technology will be part of any strategy that you are implementing, right? But that is not the starting point. It's not the reason why. So companies get distracted. A few things happen when the reasons why they fail to define growth priorities. One is some companies are just looking for cost cutting. They're too risk averse, and all they say is, show me some technology that can cut some headcount or reduce some other cost somewhere. And they're leaving most of the growth opportunities off the table there. Another thing is companies just say, oh, digital, we're going to be digital. And there's no real focus. There's no discipline of saying, here are the few things that are most important for us to focus on, the biggest problems for us to solve right now, for our customers, for our business, et cetera. And so they just start shooting in a whole lot of different directions. And the third mistake I see here is they're actually not defining problems at all because they are thinking of everything technology first. So they say, what's our ChatGPT strategy? What's our blockchain strategy? What's our metaverse strategy? Right? That is not how you start defining strategy as a business. And so in the world of digital transformation, technology is just full of all these shiny objects, which can be really distracting. So the way you address this is, the second step, as I call picking the problems that matter most, is doing this at every level of the organization. Strategy cannot be done just as like a top-down, senior executives go on the retreat once a year and write the document. Everyone, every team, every function of the company has to be constantly talking about what are the outcomes that matter most to the business, right? What are the things we're trying to achieve? What are we trying to solve for? That may be solving an internal problem, a performance issue. I know you've talked about some great examples of that on recent podcasts of yours I was listening to. It may be a customer problem you're trying to solve, but figuring what those are and then using that to guide and focus. You've got to be able to say no to a whole lot of things in order to say yes and really deliver against a few things that matter most. That is the second sort of really key piece that I've seen.
Okay, same question. Tell us somebody who's doing a good job of that.
So, a great example of that. I do think actually you mentioned Walmart. So Walmart, one of the things I like that we can learn from Walmart is that a great problem they have been focusing on. I'll sort of take this in 2 points. One is because it sort of ties to the next step. The first is they picked a few problems. One is groceries, right? And that's a really interesting problem for them to focus on because, meaning online groceries. They've already been in traditional, purely physical channel grocery delivery. It's something that matters to customers. It's very important to the business because it delivers frequency of interaction with a customer. And it generates stickiness. And also, it's something where there's still some there's open space, right? They are not coming in as like the distant second to Amazon as they are in a lot of categories of sort of general e-commerce. It's sort of a not well-solved problem, not yet, or certainly not as they started to get into it. So that's an example of a problem they focused on. They've also focused on, looking at healthcare and looking at financial services, specifically, again, because of their right to win having to do with how many people they have walking into their physical retail footprint every day, and saying, could we take advantage of that and solve some of the basic, low hanging fruit, but important needs around, basic healthcare, primary care kind of clinic support, and basic financial services for this audience, this population. And they've also been willing to look, quite a bit beyond their core business. I mean, that's both well beyond their core business. But another is they're looking at edge computing and saying, look, maybe we can leverage this massive real estate, spread that we have in North America, at least. And given that we also have by now, this is Walmart, built up a pretty strong, robust technology capability in the organization, maybe we could make a play into edge computing and say we're going to have nodes all scattered across North America at all our locations, which can feed into an edge computing network, which is, of course, all based around pushing things rather than all certain kinds of computing around things like, for example, autonomous vehicles, not being all in a server at a server farm, but that it actually functions better if it's at a place where you've got some computing horsepower, but it's within a mile of you. It's quite close. So another business model. So a great example of a company really looking at specific problems that are relevant to them to focus on.
Well, those are great examples. It brings up another question that I have. When you think about kind of the right tool for the job, or the right person with the right temperament and the right background and the right mindset for the job.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you see this too. Sometimes I see we've got, big clients like our leadership training company. We train Microsoft we train Oracle and Google and big $16 billion banks and stuff like this, right? And they've got a bunch of people who kind of got their job because they're good at keeping the trains running on time. Like it's very management.
Yeah.
It's very management based, right? And there's some creativity, but it's within pretty relatively narrow brackets, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody comes along and says, hey, we need you to think really entrepreneurial about reinventing the business over here.
Yeah.
For people who don't have a background, they don't have a skill set, they've never taken risks like that. Quite frankly, they've never had to feed their kids and pay the mortgage based on their ability to sell something new or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And often I don't hear that addressed in the hey, we're going to take job people who don't have entrepreneurial backgrounds and now toss them into this entrepreneurial thing and not address lack of training, lack of mindset, lack of, let's face it, ability to take some pretty hard bumps. Like entrepreneurship is a full contact sport,
Yeah, and it doesn't feel the same as showing up and hitting your numbers within a pretty sort of well-defined, predictable sort of framework of a long-established part of the business. So this has been so critical to my understanding of what works and doesn't work in these larger businesses, is solving exactly the problem you're pointing to. And what I've seen is you have to solve it in a multi-prong approach. I agree that training, giving people experience and the right kind of experience in coaching is critical, right? All the companies who I see who are actually pulling this off, they are pairing people up with coaches and mentors who have entrepreneurial. It's not that everybody has already had an experience as an entrepreneur, but you need things like a mentor or coach, people who have to be part of that, coaching, developing, and training those folks in the company. Part of it is culture, right? You do need to think about what are the unspoken assumptions, what are the default behaviors. I'm a big believer in thinking about organizational culture in terms of behavior. As Ben Horowitz called his book, what you do is who you are. It's really, that is what defines culture. So being thoughtful and attending to what are the gaps, where's our culture right now not maybe aligned with or really up to speed, or it's going to be supportive of the kind of maybe sufficient ownership of the work you're doing, sufficiently autonomous. People are comfortable with working more autonomously. People who are willing to take a bit more risk and try things, who are comfortable with the fact that One of the things I heard from some really smart executives is I try to find people who are comfortable with ambiguity when I'm hiring into these kinds of roles, who are comfortable with saying, well, we think we know what we're building. We think we know what the problem is we're solving, but it's also may change and your job may change and the whole structure here we're creating may change. Are you okay with that? And some people are not. But the third leg of the stool, so to speak, which I find is the least appreciated, is you have to bake this into process very carefully. You have to actually design specific processes inside the business, inside the organization, to run these the teams who are pursuing these different kind of opportunities. You cannot, this is what I call governance. You cannot have the same system for sponsoring, new ideas. You can't use the same resource allocation. You can't allocate people in the same fashion. You can't use the same metrics of what's progress. All of these things very commonly, this is one of the worst problems I see. Companies still use BAU, that's the common term, business as usual, governance and management practices across the board. And they're trying to do something new. They're trying to pursue an uncertain new opportunity. They're trying to pursue a sort of important but not really clearly defined problem. They're maybe trying to go a little bit further from the core business. There's all these things that are red flags say, hey, you are not going to be able to run this the same way. Whereas the companies I see who succeed, they've recognized that in advance, and they have defined governance, green lighting, iterative funding, team structure and design, metrics. All these things are spelled out in advance in a very different fashion. It's not that you throw out the old management playbook. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't, if you've got something that's running your core business currently in an appropriate fashion and effectively, that's great. And to your point about people, it's not that everybody in the organization has to change. You want to have those people who are really happy staying within that kind of well-known, well-defined business and just killing it and making it even better and even better and even better each day. That's great. You want to have those people. But you may be surprised when you actually start incentivizing or stop disincentivizing risk-taking and entrepreneurship and innovation. When you start, it's really about removing all the impediments that are there in your organization. Many leaders are surprised to discover, guess what? There are people in their company who have just been waiting to have the chance to have their ideas heard, to take an idea to run with it, to work in a different kind of fashion. And they'll step up and they'll be great.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, principle number 3.
So I guess that was skipping ahead to principle number 4, which is about governance and right, not
Okay.
sort of, falling into the trap of doing things as they were. The one before that, principle 3, is about experimentation. And so that's basically learning the principles of, what I call validating new ventures. So when you're looking at something that's new to your organization, setting aside the habits of planning, and more planning, which is, typically how we look at, that's how established organizations are used to running themselves. And so how do you learn when you're facing uncertainty, in particular, and when you're, especially in cases where you're moving beyond or outside of what's your kind of core business, how do you manage that? And it's about defining the opportunity, coming up with an idea, and then spelling it out. Steve Blank has been so brilliant on this, and his co-author Bob Dorff. I've had a chance to teach with both of them, over the years at my Columbia programs, and other great people. But hat tip to them, and to Steve in particular, and really spelling out the importance of taking any idea, any business idea, and saying, these are hypotheses. Let's write down all our hypotheses. What are all the things that we need to validate if this is actually going to work? And so learning to do that and setting up a process. And I try in the book just give some new tools from building on everything I've learned from them and others. One of the big things I found, companies, even teams, they get the idea and they say, they have that humility and they recognize we don't know what's going to work. Right. We know this is the problem we're solving for. We got 4 ideas to solve it. We have no idea which one will work. Probably none of them will work in the current fashion, right? You've got that humility. You've got that mindset. You want to go out and test. And what I find is people start writing down the list of, who's the customer? What problem are we solving for? What's the size of the total addressable market? What's the use case where they would actually use this? Is this the right delivery, tool or mechanism? All these questions, and then they get overwhelmed, and they say, "Where do I start? Right? What do I test first?" So that was a problem I tried to address in actually I work with a lot of companies, and based on what I learned through that in this book, and I have a tool called the 4 stages of validation, which is just a way of organizing that experimentation, getting you through these series of questions to really validate what is the problem you're solving and for whom. What is the customer to that problem? You know, what is the solution that the customer actually has any interest in and is drawn to? What's typically called product market fit. Validating what's the actual working product that the customer will use and you can deliver. And those two things do not always go together. And often the customer you get product market fit and the customer says, "Oh yes, I want it. And they sign up and you give it to them. And then after a week, they stop using it. So it's really a separate sort of stage. And then the 4th stage is business validation. How will we capture value back for the firm from this? And can we do it at a sufficient, unit economics at a point of profit and at a sufficient scale that matters to us, right? It could be a good idea for someone else, but it's not going to matter to our organization. So that's really sort of the 3rd step, because most companies, they're not doing this at all. They look at the idea and they put out the RFP to the vendor, or they draw up the plan themselves and they say, okay, we're going to build X, Y, and Z, and let's do the business case and plan all the steps we're going to do over the next 2 years. And then they build the whole thing. And if they're lucky, they do build the whole thing. And then it usually doesn't work. And if they're unlucky, they don't even finish it ever.
Yeah. So we share a mutual love for Steve Blank. I'm such a fan. We obviously met through his people. I'm a fan of Terry's as well.
Terry's great.
Same thing here. Can you tell us a story? Tell us an example. Somebody who you feel like has been able to do this. Validation.
So I see a lot of folks doing this. I see many folks who are not. So the Walmart is an example, that grocery problem. So they've done that really well. So that's been a really interesting thing to watch over the last couple of years. So again, they knew this was an opportunity. They knew it was a problem they wanted to solve for, but they didn't go off to the mountaintop and decide, okay, this is a way to solve online grocery ordering, and then we're bringing it to market. They tried different approaches. And I was at Walmart Labs a few years ago talking with their chief operating officer at the time, Jeff Schatz, and they were testing all kinds of things, testing customer response to, the whole question. It had to be, this is Walmart. This is not a venture-backed startup where like profitability, we'll come to that in a couple of years. It's like, no, any of these ideas we're going to be thinking like, in the first 90 days, like, okay, now what would the economics of this start to look like and how scalable it is, So they were looking at, will people pay for delivery? Would they pay not per delivery, but maybe per pay a membership fee? Could you have a minimum basket size, right? And Jeff said, look, I'm willing to test a lot of things, but we're not going to scale up anything unless, the economics work as well as the customer experience working. So they tried a lot, and also, delivery. Were they going to do it? Right? Were they going to hire their own delivery people? Were they going to use outside? They experimented. They tried working with partners like DoorDash and others to deliver it. They had an experiment at one point where employees checking out at the end of the day, leaving the store, would get like a notification on their app. Oh, here's a bag of things to drop off at somebody's house because they live in your neighborhood or they're on your way home. They tried lots of different experiments. So one of the things they found is there are people who would pay for, kind of the Amazon Prime model. Annual membership, and then once you pay for that, you get free delivery all year, plus some additional benefits. So that has been launched and scaled in the market, Walmart Plus. They found others who didn't want to do that, right? They found some people who wanted but just didn't want to pay. They didn't even want to have a too big a basket size. That didn't seem to be the right solution. So then they said, well, what if we meet you halfway? We'll do what's called BOPS, buy online, pick up at store. So we create a great digital interface. It's very easy to manage your list, carry things over from last week, so forth, quickly put together what you want, have the whole order. Somebody else picks all the things off the shelf. They get all put it in the bags for you. You do have to drive by Walmart. You drive up to Walmart. You don't even have to leave your car. They bring the groceries out, put it in the bag. For that, they were able to offer it for free. And there was a whole nother segment that was the right solution. Well, guess what? Then we had the pandemic hit, and that was amazing. That took off like a rocket because, of course, suddenly there was much more demand for that. But the great thing was that was scalable. You couldn't have scaled Walmart Plus, the delivery people, nearly as fast. So that was a great solution. They've got another one. So more recently, again, another tack on the same problem. They kept testing and seeing what's out there. What are the unmet needs? They found there's some customers who don't just want to have the product delivered. Groceries sit on the front doorstep, and your ice cream starts to melt. Right? If you're me, your sorbet starts to melt. They actually want the Walmart employee, somebody they know by name, recognize, or comfortable with, kind of like a dog walker. They come in the door and they put the groceries away for you, and they put it in the fridge, in the freezer, in the cabinets, and it's all done for you. Turned out there's a segment who wants that. It's a premium service, and they've launched it now. It's called Walmart In-Home. So again, being really focused on the twin challenge of sort of, you got to meet the customer's need and meet them on their terms, but it's also got to be something that's going to work for the business at scale. Testing lots and lots of different things, trying different approaches, learning as you go, and not even once you get something that's working, not assuming, okay, we're done. This is our thing. Keep learning from the customer.
Yeah, fascinating. Maybe we'll go the opposite direction. Can you talk about some of the reasons CNN Plus didn't work?
Yeah. So there's a negative example. So CNN Plus is a really interesting, I think, learning case because this is a company that did what most companies do. And in retrospect, it's like, oh my gosh, this was a disaster, but come on, this is what everyone does in their job practically. So, they've got their established business, they're in news, they see the streaming world, taken off. Disney Plus has this, massive uptake in its first month, and their own, sister divisions at Warner Brothers at the time, Max, HBO Max, it was called then, had launched with HBO and everything. So they say, hey, this isn't just, for Netflix and so forth. We should get into this game. So this is the idea. Could we do an app, a paid app for a streaming service for news, right? Leveraging the CNN brand. Now, I want to say this is a good problem for them to solve. It's very strategically relevant. They've got a unique right to win potentially here. It's a great question. It's a great idea. What happened, though, with that idea? So they followed what I call sort of the standard planning, steps, which is first, you study it, right? You get a lot of third-party data, not first-party data, no experiments, but you gather a lot of benchmarks, get a lot of case studies from other companies. You hire a large consulting firm to do this for you, and they did. And you bring in lots of data of kind of what's going on out there, what other people have done, and you tell yourself, okay, you've educated yourself. Second step, then you analyze, right? And so you do these business cases, very detailed. I say, okay, well, here's the different options or scenarios we could pursue. What would happen? And you lull yourself into thinking you can make projections on what will happen if you take one or another approach. And so they had this whole plan figured out of how they were going to build this whole thing, the talent they were going to use, what the programming should look like, how many of their current CNN customers who watch them on television were now going to subscribe to the app, what percentage of them would convert. And then as we go international, what percentage of international audiences would convert because it was starting in the US. And they had these nice, impressive sounding numbers. They said, very cautiously, we'll have, a few million in the US in year 2, I think, or so. And then, year 4, they're going to have over 20 million people. And they had this, this nice business case, as they call it, right? Third step, how do you decide? It's up to the big dog, right? It's up to the expert or the most senior people. So in this case, that was Jeff Zucker and Jason Kilar, his boss. And they both said, this is the future of news. They had this conviction. And so that was it, right? Okay. How do you make a decision? First, you analyze. First, you gather a lot of data. Then you're studying the problem. Then you analyze it. And then the senior most person makes a decision. And then what do? You execute. The belief is that if you really want to succeed in doing something bold and new, you've got to, put in a lot of resources, right? The exact opposite of what you should be doing. And so they spent $300 million before day one, just getting ready to launch. And they launched, and it did not do well, right? They less about 1% of the sort of existing audience converted to the app. And I'm sorry, but I don't think anyone was paying in that first month because everything just starts with a free trial. So just being willing to give your credit card and in principle consider paying for something. 1%, right? And so it was shut down. The whole thing was shut down in a month. The point is, this was an interesting question. Could we build a paid streaming news service at this point in time? And if so, what would it look like? I mean, it's a set of questions. Great question to pursue. You did not need to spend $300 million to find the answer, right? I could have told you that with $30,000 and probably 30 days, and that's the difference between, rapid experimentation, between this process of validating new ventures versus planning
them. Wow. 300 million. Adds up
yeah.
quick.
It does.
Okay, principle number 5.
So the last part, so remember 3 was learning to experiment, and then 4 was about governance, because that's really about taking that learning, like how does teams, test and learn, and creating the scaffolding, as I said, the processes, so you can do that at scale, right? So you've got boards to greenlight projects. You've got iterative funding mechanisms rather than annual budgeting reviews. You've got teams who are actually able, they're multifunctional and small, and they're able, given the decision rights, to actually move on their own. So you've done all that. That's 4. And then 5 is all about capabilities. And to me, this is really thinking about and investing in, for the long haul, what are we going to need to make this work? And I put this 5 because you don't really understand what your biggest gaps are until you have started down this path of defining where you're going, picking some problems that matter, starting to try to actually experiment a little bit and figure out what roadblocks are holding you back. And then you can start thinking about, what do we need most in our digital technology, right? Now, here we do want to think about things like building a tech stack that is modular, and not monolithic, that is adaptable and scalable. What are the things you build yourselves? What are the things you buy? Investing and growing the right kind of data assets that you're going to need over time for the future. So we're talking about technology. We're talking about talent. What are the skill sets that we need? And that's technical skills, but it's also non-technical skills, like your whole point about, people who have experience with skin in the game and being an entrepreneur or moving in a very different kind of organization. So it's a real broad view of what do you need in terms of talent. And you're only going to solve the talent puzzle from a kind of all directions point of view. I think of it as sort of a life cycle. It's about hiring people. It may be about acquiring people, acqui-hires. You buy a smaller company for the people more than anything else. It's about training the people you have. It's about retaining. One of the biggest problems I see in digital is companies hire in digital talent, really impressive star talent, and they can't hold on to them because those people show up, and after a few months, it's clear. They say, I can't do my best work here. This is like, I'm spending my whole day in meetings and politics. I want to be out building stuff. So retaining is critical. All these things you've got to look at every aspect of talent. And then the last part, absolutely essential, is culture. Right. So technology, talent, and culture. And as we talked about before, it's figuring out what are those gaps between the culture that has gotten you where you are today, and to acknowledge that maybe the benefits it's had, versus the culture you're going to need to pursue that future direction you've set, that course you've set for the business. And it may require people who are more collaborative and more comfortable working with people from different disciplines and areas quite different than them. It may require people who have bigger appetite for risk taking, and it may require people who are less, leadership, who is less expecting that their job is to tell other people what to do, and realize their job is maybe more, how do you support and enable the people under you to, go after, chase down that problem that you help them, identify. So figure out what's holding you back. The most successful companies think about culture in terms of behavior. They pick a couple things that they say, we really need to get better at this or at that. Or we need to make a shift here from being very product focused to being very customer obsessed, whatever that shift is. And then they don't just talk about it, but they actually, again, take that hard look at their own processes. Things like, what do people get rewarded for? What do people get incentivized for? What are you making really hard for people to do in their jobs with red tape or other things? So making sure that the processes are also enabling that culture that you want.
That's great. You know, I, uh, I'm interested in some other things, like going through your
Yeah.
LinkedIn, your involvement in Marketing Hall of Fame. Can you talk about
Yeah.
that?
Sure. Yeah. So I was for several years on the board of the New York American Marketing Association, and which has over the years established a couple things. A company called Green Book, which has been very influential in market research as a discipline. Created the Effie Awards, which in advertising is sort of in many ways maybe the most important award. It was the first idea to have an award for advertising not based on how creative or clever something was, but how effective it was. And it spun out as its own company. And while I was there
What's the website for that one?
for the Effies, I don't know the website, but it's Effie is spelled EFFIE. So if you just Google Effie Awards, you'll find out. So that was a major. So that was before my time. But while I was there, Joanna Seddon, actually, she was on the board with me, and she spearheaded, and we all worked on really launching and building this really neat new thing, which is the Marketing Hall of Fame. And this is a chance to focus on exceptional marketers from across B2B marketing, B2C marketing, all kinds of industries, and not just the typical, really a range from sort of, a few sort of thought leaders or academics, some people from the agency side. Well, Yves Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, we gave the award to one year as saying, how he had built such an incredible brand and sort of epitomized what a lot of people in our voting academy, considered what marketing is all about, which is really thinking about the customer, thinking about the impact of your business on the world, and thinking about how do you build a brand and a company around those ideas. He was great. He gave a fascinating talk, and he started by saying, like, the last thing I ever expected was to get a marketing award. Am I a marketer? Well, here's how I built this company and why. And it was brilliant. So that has continued. I was the president for a couple of years. I'm no longer on the board, but it's a great organization, and many of my friends are still there. And I love to see each year who they're picking out and celebrating for the next round of inductees.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, next, when we were talking, you were talking about the role of coaching. It
Yeah.
seems to me that like corporate America has embraced this more and more over
Hmm.
the years. When you think about effective coaching within businesses,
Hmm.
what makes the list for you, or what are the elements that make effective coaching?
I think it's being a great listener. I think, an effective coach helps to listen to not just what the leader, the executive, the person they're coaching is kind of facing and struggling with or looking for help with, but kind of is listening for what's behind that. And sometimes that may be, an underlying problem that they don't recognize as what's really kind of throwing up this issue in their face. It may be that they're looking at it's identifying the personal reason why. Why is this so difficult for because they might say it seems like a pretty obvious problem to solve. So why is this person not kind of reaching for the obvious solution, and instead of just sort of saying, "Hey, you should do X"? It's like, okay, let me try to figure out why they aren't going there immediately. So I think it's like a really great, thoughtful listener is critical. I think also obviously having had the experience, I believe, of, seeing people, executives in different organizations, quite different organizations is going to be really helpful. And I think it depends a little on sort of what you're there to help them with. Like I said, if you have an organization that is trying to build up its capability around, let's be more entrepreneurial. Let's learn how to take risks. Let's how to get outside of our shell and be more, take more ownership of our work or greater bias towards action. So you want somebody who's maybe seen that happen and may happen with difficulty in different organizations, but really ideally you want somebody who's really lived that, to a strong degree, who's got a deep understanding of, in that case, entrepreneurial experience. In another case, somebody who's got, some other kind of skill set or background that's going to be helpful. But to me, those would be sort of the top ingredients.
Thinking about that subject, it feels to me like there's been such a move. Like you think about like the percentage of corporate training that was 2-day seminars, and
Hmm.
then it was, watch these videos online. That'll be way cheaper. And it's like the 2-day seminars, like there's like a sugar high for 2 weeks, and by 3 months later, everything's back to normal. And like the
Yeah.
online videos, it's like it's so cheap and easy, but nobody actually became different.
Watches it. Yes.
Yeah,
Or if
and
they do, it doesn't. Yeah.
and then it seems like more and more there's like the move has been towards coaching in my observation. Do you see
Yeah.
that as well?
Yeah, I do see, I think that progression that you just laid out, I think we could see more of it, but I see that in a number of organizations where I think what works best is companies who are looking for a collaborative relationship. If they're getting outside help for their people and for their leaders, it's not about, oh, you solve this problem for us, right? But it's also not just drop in and like, give us your shtick, dump all that insight or those frameworks on us, and then great, we're done. We don't want to spend any more money or time, go home. It's more, we're going to be solving this problem ourselves, but we want to have a different perspective at the table. That's certainly been my experience. I think the most both rewarding, but also, personally in terms of the experience as you're doing it, but also like looking back and checking in a year later, 2 years later, and hearing like, oh yeah, here's what we've done and we ran with this and we did this. It's those cases which, are not the norm, where I was brought in and they said, we want you to be a part of the team. It's like, don't bring in your team and don't sit down and tell us everything. Here, we've got a few people working on this. We want you to be not a fly on the wall, but like a different voice at the table and asking different questions. And, at times as that outside perspective, say, hey, let's give you an hour to like share a bunch of thinking that we are maybe not even considering. But again, it's that looking for that partner who's really kind of joining your team.
Yeah. Our company, Influential Leaders, we're getting brought in more and more to train their leaders and managers how to be
Mm.
coaches to their own
Mm.
people and have that like installed internally. Do you see that much in your
I
work?
think that's a great model. Yeah, if you can do it, and um, I think one of the things that leaders have to do is to be able to coach others. So I think that's a great sort of skill to build in them. I mean, I think what I've increasingly felt, and this is from learning from great leaders, I want to be clear, not some idea I came to them with, but what I've observed is really effective leaders are good at a few things. They really are good at sort of defining where we're going. What's the culture we want? What's the big picture? That they're able to really sort of crystallize from a lot of. It's not that they start out with a whole lot of knowledge or necessarily technical expertise, but they're able to sort of bring in and synthesize a lot of kind of points of view and sort of say, okay, what is this? What's really the key idea here? What's the gist of this? What's the thing that's most important to us? And then they're really good at communicating. And not everybody gets that. The more leadership is your role, the more that's more and more what you're doing as opposed to, I don't know, building a product yourself. The more important it is that you get good at communicating. And that's the great leaders I see. They do all kinds of things and they're great at telling stories and spotlighting things and making it relatable and funny and just over communicating. That's one of the things I learned. It's just like, say it till you're blue in the face. And then the third thing, and this sort of ties in some ways to the ideas around like servant leadership, they recognize then the main thing they need to do is help the people below them. It's not about making decisions. I mean, obviously, there's going to be some decisions you have to make, but all the companies that move fast at scale, what they do is they push decision making down. Every decision is pushed down as low as it possibly can be. So you try as a leader to spend as little time making decisions as you can, and as much time, as it was Valev Akili when he was at Citi, he's now at Visa. But as he put it to me, great leaders out there removing the roadblocks. Like that's what they do day by day. As they look at the people who are trying to do the right work, the work that they think they should be doing, and they say, "Hey, what's holding you back? What's gumming up the works? What's your problem this week? Let me see if I can figure out a way to help you out." So that's, I think coaching is, as a leader, if you're talking about sort of mentoring and coaching your own people, is a little different than like an external coach. To me, that's a lot of what this is. It's like really saying, okay, what are you focusing on? See if you can explain it to me. If we get clarity on that, then what's holding you back? And then let me see what I can actually do to help you progress faster.
It's funny through this conversation because our one business, Greystoke Networks, where we're making podcasts and videos for companies, right? We're almost a completely, almost 100% remote company.
Hmm.
I would say 80% of our clients we've never actually met in person.
Yeah.
Most of our staff have never met in person. Like we're like very digital that way, right?
Yeah.
But influential leaders is like historically been 10 senior leaders in a room for a half day, 8 weeks in a row.
Hmm.
Learning by doing, and like we're really looking at the like. I mean, I know everybody else already did this, but like looking at like what does effective online learning look like when it's
Hmm.
not like
Yeah.
one-way knowledge transfer. It's like learning by doing and deep engagement and like having them practice enough with a peer that they're not going to be
Hmm.
embarrassed trying it on their staff and
Yeah.
because they just won't do it. Like they're not willing, most of them aren't willing to look dumb in front of their staff.
Hmm.
So we have
Yeah.
to have them like use it for like at least 20 hours
Hmm.
before, in like safer environments before they're
Yeah.
willing to like potentially look dumb in front of their staff.
Hmm.
And so like rethinking like, what if that had to be 100% digital experience
Yeah.
and even like our sales and marketing, like what if the
Yeah.
whole thing was going to be like our other business where we don't meet, nobody meets anybody except
Yeah.
on video.
I mean, I think we've got a couple of things going on right now. One is companies are being forced to think, many companies are taking a hybrid approach or being forced to take a hybrid approach, but I think that's great. And one of the things I love about that is you can't really effectively take a hybrid approach to work unless you shift your thinking from activity to outcomes. And you have to be able to spell out what do we actually want each employee to achieve or to be doing, and not what they should be doing, what should they be achieving. Right. And only when you know that can you give them the freedom to work remotely and be comfortable with it. But also only then when you can you also figure out what are the outcomes that are better served by being in person or being partly in person. And so it's not this kind of hackneyed negotiation. You want 0 days in the office. I want 5. I'll meet you at 3. It's like, well, which days win for what purpose? So a lot of companies are not yet there, but I think this is going to nudge them to actually thinking much more deeply about what their people are or should be trying and what they hope their people will be achieving. Um, and then to your point for going, how do we push something purely digital? It's a great challenge. I mean, I've been doing online teaching for, over 6 years. I was lucky in that I was well experienced in it before the pandemic came, so I wasn't thrown a loop, curveball. But it's very different, and exactly as you said, it's not about transmitting content. It's about I had a great conversation years ago with Ashwin Damara, who was built with his co-founder, a company called Eruditus, which is a big global ed tech player, and who we've worked with is with Columbia Business School. And Ashwin said, the challenge here is actually it's about making sure that the person taking the online class is actually engaged, like lean forward, doing something, taking it in, and not just kind of leaning back and treating it like Netflix. That's actually the biggest design challenge. It's not how do we explain these complicated topics or how long should the videos be or what do we do? What's the mix of what kind of animation should we have? All that kind of stuff. He said, no. How do we design an experience where they are actually like not just soaking up, but they're thinking, applying, reflecting. You got to break it up. You got to give all these little prompts. You got to actually add a lot of friction, that makes people do these things. As you said, like go out and test it with your, try it 2 times with your the people who report to you because they can't laugh in your face. And then, when you're comfortable with that, now you can do it in front of the customer or whatever the equivalent is. But it's a fascinating challenge.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, listen, for people who want to get a hold of the new book or they want to find out more about you, where are the best places online?
Well, the new book is The Digital Transformation Roadmap, Rebuild Your Organization for Continuous Change. And that is available everywhere books are sold. I'm a big fan of Amazon, but you can get it wherever you like to get your books. And also, I have a newsletter, a Substack newsletter. This is free. And actually, if you sign up for it, you'll get the first chapter of the book. So if you're curious to just sort of give it a try, give it a taste. So I write every week for this audience. And you can subscribe to that on my own website, which is davidrogers.digital. So not the usual domain extension.com or whatever, davidrogers.digital.
I love it. Well, maybe to end off, what's one of the best pieces of advice you ever received?
Best pieces of advice I ever received. Never stop learning. I think I heard that from my dad when I was very young, because he was a teacher, and I did not actually think for many years that I would be an educator. That was not, I was like, it's my dad. I'm going to do something totally different. I was a jazz musician and a composer, and that was my first career, which then led me into business, through the music business, and then another step and another step. So, keep your mind open and always be looking for new things to learn every day. I think that was, one of the best bits of advice I ever got.
Solid advice. Well, thanks for doing this. It's great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jess. I've really enjoyed it.
Bye, everyone.